All I can do is be me, whoever that is, and whoever he was enough. Bob Dylan remained relevant for more than 50 years. His lyrics, mantras, and social ideology are still pertinent in today's society. There is a lot to be learned from a man with such a lengthy legacy. Bob Dylan's mark, politically, socially, and musically, is still clearly visible and continues to remain in the minds of the current generation. Today we will discuss Bob Dylan's lyrical progression, societal beliefs, and influence in the politics of the 60s. Dylan would describe himself in Martin Scorsese's documentary entitled No Direction Home, a musical expeditionary. He began his career as a folk musician, getting inspiration from artists like Woody Guthrie, and was eventually signed to Columbia Records in 1962, and produced his debut self-entitled album in the same year. By 1964, Dylan was playing 200 concerts a year. Dylan was never concrete in regards to his musical style, and by 1965 he had begun his movement away from what people called folk purism. Though fans were a mixed bag when it came to this stylistic progression, the music Dylan produced during the years of 1965 and 1966 would revolutionize rock. Songs like Blowin' in the Wind, The Times They Are A-Changin', and Like a Rolling Stone, just to name a few, are the product of this musical movement. In the May 24, 2011 article in Rolling Stone magazine commemorating Dylan's 70th birthday, Bono wrote of him, "Every songwriter after him carries his baggage." His lyrics were not just surface words, they were relatable and deep. And as Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead would say later in that same article, it's beyond genius. In a 2001 biographical summary in another issue of Rolling Stone magazine, the introduction summed up just how special his musical gift was. For almost 50 years, Bob Dylan has remained, along with James Brown, the most influential American music rock and roll has ever produced. Dylan has been both deified and denounced for his shifts of interest, while whole schools of musicians took up his ideas. His lyrics, the first in rock to be seriously regarded as literature, became so well known that politicians from Jimmy Carter to Václav Havel have cited them as influence. To understand why his music was so important, we must examine this impact on society. First, we will examine some important philosophies of Dylan's. Second, the way he managed to say the unsayable. And third, how this impacted society. In Martin Scorsese's documentary, No Direction Home, many comments were made about Bob Dylan's outlook on life. In his song entitled It's Alright Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, the lyric, It's alright ma, it's life and life only, sums up Dylan's philosophy on his self and the outside world. This is, in a way, his mantra in the way that he faces the world. He was and is not a highly analytical person. For example, in Scorsese's documentary, interviews and press conferences show Dylan's inability, if you will, to answer probing questions in regards to his lyrics and his increasing fame. Bob Dylan was who he was, and to refer back to the introduction, he stated, "All I can do is be me, whoever that is." Liam Clancy of the Clancy brothers would go on to describe him in Scorsese's film, "He changed voices, he changed images. It wasn't necessary for him to be a definitive person. He was a receiver, he was possessed, and he articulated what the rest of us wanted to say but couldn't say." He was, in every sense of the word, a ramblin' man. Remaining defined by one persona was not Dylan's style. He was a chameleon of sorts. His rather unidentifiable self, coupled with his rather laid-back outlook on life, was a favorable combination. Statements of Dylan's like, "No fear, no envy, no meanness," became an ideal people then and now can appreciate these simply put ways of living. It was Dylan's laid-back ideals of self and humanity, as well as his profound lyrical prose, that caused another great folk musician, Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary, to sing his praises. "He has his finger on the pulse of our generation," said Yarrow in Scorsese's No Direction Home. Clearly, people responded to his lyrics and social ideologies. His ideas and messages are still transcending today's generation. It was through this connection and repertoire he had with the current generation that he was able to influence their political attitudes as well. Bob Dylan felt that it was his job as an artist to sing out against darkness wherever he sees it, to tell it and think it and speak it and breathe it. Songs like A Hard Rain's A-Gonna Fall, Blowin' in the Wind, and A Change Is Gonna Come spoke out against war and racial inequality. When Bob Dylan won the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, President Obama had this to say of Dylan: "There is not a bigger giant in the history of American music. All these years later, he's still chasing that sound, still searching for a little bit of truth. And I have to say that I'm a really big fan. I remember in college listening to Bob Dylan and my world opening up, because he captured something about this country that was so vital." Clearly, Bob Dylan was more than just a musician. He was an activist for the rights of his country. In conclusion, Bob Dylan goes beyond that of a musician. His lyrics were and remain pertinent, as do his beliefs. There is more to him than a simple biographical statement could describe. Although he would argue, it doesn't really matter what I said, and it still doesn't really. I think we can all agree that there is a lot to be learned from this notoriously enigmatic man. I first discussed his musical influence, then his impact socially, and finally his political importance. After learning about the many sides of Bob Dylan, we can sum up by borrowing one of his most popular lyrics: "It's all right, Ma, it's life and life only."